Hi and welcome to this tutorial. In the beginning of the Spring tutorials, I introduced you to the bean factory, which was a Spring object that let us create Spring beans. And later we replaced it with the application context, which was actually doing the job of the bean factory, but I told you that it had some additional functionalities. So in this tutorial, we're going to look at one such additional functionality that the application context object provides over a bean factory object, and this is the support for messaging and internationalization. So if you have messages that need to be displayed in different places in your application UI, you would not want to have those messages inside the code, be it a Java class or a JSP. You want to take all those messages out and keep them in a common properties file, and then you would want to refer to those texts inside the properties file and then print out those texts instead of having the text itself inside your source code. So Spring provides support for that. You can have a file which consolidates all these key and value pairs, and then you specify the key itself in your application and refer to the text which is assigned to that key in the properties file. So we're going to have a look at how we can use this support for messaging, and we'll see how Spring helps us in making this a bit easier. So first, what I'll do is let me create a simple properties file. Just say new file. I'll call this my messages.properties and click finish. Now here, if I click on the source tab, you can see that it's obviously an empty file. So I can add key value pairs here to store all my text messages. So let me have a greeting message equals hello. So I will save this file. So I have my message hello saved inside a properties file, and I've given it a key of greeting. So I want to use this key value pair and print the hello message in my program. So let's say in my drawing app.java, after printing the shape, I want to print a greeting over here. Okay, so now the first thing that we need to do in order to have this messaging support enabled is to have a message source being defined in my application. And the way to define this is just like any other bean. I would define this in the Spring XML. And we'll have a look at what the class for that is, but let me start by defining the bean first. Bean, I'll give the ID as message source, and the class for this is org dot spring framework dot context dot support. So if you have a look, the context is where the application context related stuff come in. So that's where this class is there. So in the support, there is this message source implementation called resource bundle message source. So resource bundle message source. So the resource bundle message source is a class that Spring provides out of the box, and this message source helps us pick messages out of property files. So since we are using a property file, this is what we need to use here. Okay, so now this bean that we have declared here has a name message source, and I've defined an out-of-the-box class of Spring to use, and this is what we're going to use to pick messages out here. And this needs a configuration. So you need to tell this particular class where the property file is. So in essence, we need to tell this class what the name of our property file is. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'll open a property tag, and the name of the property is base names. And what I need to do here is I need to provide a list of all the property files that I have where I've stored all the messages. So obviously we can have more than one. So if you have multiple property files, you'll have to give the names of all of those property files over here. And this is what this message source is going to refer to when it needs to pull up messages. Okay, so I need to provide a list and the value. I just need to give the name. I don't have to give the dot properties extension. By default, it looks for properties from the dot property files in the class path. So I have a message source bean that knows what property file to read. So now what we'll do is we'll add the code here to print out the greeting message. The way I do this is by calling a method of the context itself, which is our application context. So the context object has a method called getMessage, and there are actually different signatures for this getMessage, but I'm going to use a signature which takes in 4 parameters. The first parameter that I'm going to pass here is the name of the property that I need to retrieve. So this happens to be greeting in our case. So this is what will be the first parameter here. So I'm going to pass the string greeting. The second parameter here is a string of objects in case my message takes in some parameters. We'll have a look at parameter messages a bit later, but for now, since I do not have any parameters in my message here, it's just a simple text. So I will pass null here. We're going to look at parameters in just a minute. Okay, so these are the first 2 parameters. The third parameter is the default message that it needs to return in case it does not find a message that we are looking for. So I will call this default greeting. And this default greeting is used when we have a key here that is not available in the properties file. And it also has some other behavior, like if you are looking at a locale specific string, that's again something that we're going to look at in just a minute. But if the whole point of this default string is that if you do not find a value for this key, you have to print this. So this is what we tell Spring. So this is the third parameter. And the fourth parameter is the locale for which we need to get the message. I'm going to use null for this one as well. And we're going to look at locale also in a minute. But this is what gets the message hello, and it returns that message. So what I'll do for now is I'll just do a system.out.println, and I'll print the message that this returns. Save this. If we run this, yes, we get the hello message. So this is the result of this context.getMessage. So we have told the context that first of all, we need to use the resource bundle message source, which means that Spring is actually looking at property files, and we give the property file name. And then in our application, we use a getMessage method of the application context to get the message for the greeting key. So this is one of the ways in which you can get the messages, but most of the times the normal usage of the messaging feature of Spring is when you want to use it in a bean. So let's say I have the circle bean and I want to print messages here. Say instead of this draw, I want to print out a message. So I want to have all the static text over here in the message properties, and I want to use that over here. So we can do it using the same method call. We can make this application context aware, that like I've showed you earlier, and you can do a context.getMessage, but there is a better way. So what we can do is in our spring.xml, we have defined a bean called MessageSource. So this MessageSource also has, it implements an interface called MessageSource, and that has this method, what we see here. Okay, so we have a get message. So this get message method is also available in this bean inside this class. So what we need to do is, as long as we have a member variable of message source inside this circle, we can do dependency injection and we can get this particular bean inside the circle class, and we can do a get message for that bean. Let me write the code so that it becomes clear. So what I will do is I will use a message source member variable inside the circle. So I will declare a private message source message source. So the message source is available in Org Spring Framework context. So the message source is the interface that is implemented by various different implementations. So this get message method that you're seeing here is actually a method of that interface. Since the application context implements that interface, you can use a get message there. And even this particular bean over here, the resource bundle message source, also implements the message source interface. So we can either use the application context and call the get message of that object to get the message, or we can get an instance of this bean which again implements the message source, and we can call the same method for this bean. So what we do is we define a member variable of type message source. Now let me generate the setter here. We need the setters. Okay, so I have a setter here which has a message source it's a setter for the message source. Now the reason why I have declared this member variable and I've generated the getters and setters is because I want this bean, an instance of this bean, to be made available here. Now having a member variable is just one step, the first step. The second step is to actually do the dependency injection. Now I can do dependency injection by type because there is only one bean in this entire XML of type resource bundle message source. And of course there's only one bean of type message source itself. So what I will do is I will do a auto-wired. I'll do this on the property itself. I'll say auto-wired, and it's going to auto-wire by type. Import auto-wire, and that's it. So now I have an instance of this. I have an instance of this message source inside my circle class. Okay, so now what I need to do is use this message source to get the message. So I will do this in the draw method, since I'm going to call the draw method anyway. So after these two statements, I will do a system.out .println, and over here what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a this dot message source dot here you have a get message method. So I will use the same signature that I have used over here, because again it's operating on the same property file, so it has access to the same text. Paste this here. So again I'm going to pass the key name, which is greeting, no parameters, default value in case the value for that key is not found, and then the locale. I'm going to print this out. So save this. I'm going to remove this line here. I don't want this greeting to be printed in the main. I want it to be printed in the draw method. So this is where I'm printing this hello greeting. So if we run this, the shape.draw should print out that greeting. So let's run this. Well, here you go. It prints out the greeting, but this time it's not from the main application. It's from the draw method of a bean. So this is a simple way to have access to the message source in all your beans. So all you need to do is have a member variable of message source and then do dependency injection by type using auto-wired. And then in the Spring XML, you would have defined the message source and given it a property file name. So it's going to pick that up and give you whatever text you need depending on the key that you pass. Okay, so now that I've done this, what I want to do next is I want to use this message source to print out these two messages. So I'm doing a system.out.println in my draw, and I have hard-coded text over here. So I want to use the message source to print this out. So what I will do is, first, let's take this message. Drawing circle needs to be moved to the messages.properties. So I will have a drawing.circle equals, so this is the message that I need to display. Okay, so here I can remove this over here, and then instead I will use the this.message source.get message, and I will get the message that I've just added into the property file. Paste this here, and the message here is drawing.circle. I've changed the default message as well, but that's not really required here. We have the message over here already. So now this is a replacement for our previous system.out.println, which actually had the hard-coded text. So let's run this once again to make sure it's picking it up. Yes, it is picking it up, and you can see there is a drawing circle. Okay, so this is fine, but now the question is, how are we going to replace this? So here we are displaying a text for the point, and then we have added these getX and getY methods over here. So what we're doing is we're interleaving the static text with the actual value of these objects. So this is again something that we can do using message source. So what I'll do is, let me just copy this text over here. I'll call this drawing.point equals, I'll paste this. Now here what I can do is I can add placeholders for arguments. So the first argument will be 0 in curly braces, and there's no need to get all the quotes over here. The second argument will be 1 in curly braces. So this is what would get substituted over here, but essentially what I'm doing is I'm defining the message text. So the static part are going to be standard text, and then the dynamic part are going to be the arguments. So I have two arguments over here, 0 and 1 in curly braces. So I will save this, and here what I need to do now is, let me just copy this again. So I will be calling a drawing.point, and then the second argument here I told you is a list of arguments. It's an array of arguments. So since I have two arguments that need to be substituted over here, I need to create a new array, an object array, by the way. It takes object parameters. So I need to create an object array which has two elements, which are the two values that I need to pass over here. So I will say new object, and I will pass the points center dot getX and center dot getY. Okay, so I'm creating a new object array, and I'm passing these two parameters, and I will call this the default point message, and let me save and run this. Well, there you go. It's printed this. I think it's printing it twice because I didn't remove the earlier one. Yeah, I haven't removed the earlier one, so let's comment this out. and run this again. Well, there you see, it's printed out the same message, and this time it's actually getting it from the properties file. And what it's also doing is it's doing parameter substitution over here in the message. So I've defined two parameters, two arguments in the message, and I'm substituting those values by passing an array of objects. And if you have more arguments, you need to pass multiple elements in this array. But what it's going to do is it's going to substitute the values inside this array into this message, and then it's going to get the completed message, and that's going to be the result of this get message call. So this is a high level look at message source interface and how we can use this message source interface to get messages out of property files. And this is something very handy if you want to do internationalization as well. What you can do is if you have multiple locales that you need to supply messages for, then probably the message property file, you'll have to rename this, refactor, rename. So I can call this underscore en for English, and I can supply different locales over here, and then I can pass the corresponding locale as the last parameter over here, and then the corresponding message is picked up from the right properties file. Spring is going to do all that for you. You just have to pass the key, and then the right message gets picked up. I'm not going to cover locale here in the interest of time, but this is something that you can explore, and the Spring Online documentation also has an example that covers this locale feature.